Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NeoSystems Big Picture Cyber Town Hall. Now, I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Thanks, Don, and thanks everyone in the audience. Welcome to our continuing series of Cybersecurity Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions. My guest today, Stacy Bostjanick. I do want to mention at the start that we are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the Defense Industrial Base. We also have on the line our sketch note artist, Wade Forbes, who's going to be making a visual record of the conversation, and we'll share that out with you after the session ends. Our focus at NeoSystems as a managed service provider is on federal government contractors, and that's primarily who we have in our audience today. If you've got some questions for Stacy, please send them in the Q&A feature within Zoom, and I'll work those into my conversation. I'll start with a quick introduction of Stacy. I think most people in this sector already know who she is and what she's doing, but Stacy serves as the Chief of Implementation and Policy with the Deputy Chief Information Officer for Cybersecurity in the Office of the CIO and within DoD. In this position, she serves as the focal point within DoD CIO to implement the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, the CMMC, that we all know very well, across the Defense Industrial Base. She directs their efforts to educate DIB partners on the program requirements. She ensures that the DoD implements risk information sharing, and she's responsible for ensuring that the defense acquisition community is trained on getting CMMC into contracts. Prior to joining the CIO's office, she was Director of Supply Chain Risk Management within DoD Acquisition and Sustainment. Her background is a career DoD civilian specializing in contracting and procurement, holding senior positions at DIA, Missile Defense Agency, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Stacy, thanks very much for joining us today.
Oh, no problem. It's my pleasure.
And I was hoping we might see your dogs on the call today, but you said they're off in the other room. So
they're upstairs. Yes.
We'll miss their insights. So a couple of topics I want to talk about today. One is timing. The other is kind of use of service providers and how that plays into CMMC. Since the last time you joined us on this series, you and the CMMC program have both moved from acquisition and sustainment over to CIO. Maybe give us a little bit of idea of how that's affected the program in terms of activities, timing, what we can expect in the DIB community.
So the move to CIO hasn't impacted our timing as much as the revision of the program that went on last spring. Right. So we ended up with the new administration. We took a pause and we reviewed the program to ensure that it was in alignment with the goals and achievements we wanted to see from this administration. And so to that end, we have revised the program. So when we started with CMMC 1.0, it was thought that we only needed to go through the CFR 48 rulemaking processes and procedures, which would have allowed it to be a DFARS clause. But through the revision, I think it was thought better that we needed to go through the 32 CFR rulemaking as well to codify CMMC as a program. So what did that do? That suspended our effort with the first interim rule that we had under the 48 CFR, which allowed us to go ahead and implement CMMC 1.0, but we suspended that effort because we changed the program significantly enough that we felt like implementation at that point would have only been allowed in accordance with the way that rule was written. So we needed to do some revisions. So now we're going through crafting the text for the 32 CFR rule. So that process and procedure is no easy task because you really have to delineate what you want contractors to have to do in the rule. Now, there's a fine line you have to walk because in the rule, I can point to instructions and say you must do it in accordance with this instruction, and the instruction can go through revision a little bit faster than a rule. So there's a decision that needs to be made. If it's in the rule, you gotta do it. If it's in and points to instruction, it's not as hard wired as it would be as if it was written and codified in the rule text. But if you think that there might be something that would change it down the road, then you may want to keep it there. So if we feel like there might be some tweaks or something, then we're trying to walk that fine line. So we're trying to get all that documentation done and have it submitted to OMB late summer, early fall to get into the process with the anticipation and hope that we will get another interim rule approval for the 32 CFR, which would happen in March, which the 48 update will match that, right? So that once we get that documentation done, the 48 rulemaking activity will update the 48 rule. We're hoping that they'll both pop out with an interim rule in March, which will start the 60-day public comment period, which we highly encourage everybody to keep your eye on that FRN and go ahead and do the public comment, whatever you think, to give us guidance on how we want to help tweak the program to make it the best it can be. So that's when we would say that the public comment period would be done at the end of May of 2023. So then we could start implementing it in contracts at that point. So you probably would see the first contract with a requirement end of summer 2023 if we are granted an interim rule. If we're not granted an interim rule, then it's going to be a year later, right? So if OMB says, yeah, we don't see the national security risk and we don't think it's urgent, and so you're going to have to go on and get a final rule. I don't think that will happen because I think everybody understands cyber to be very important. Moving to CIO, I've got Mr. McEwen as my boss, which is very nice to have. He understands the requirements. He has a lot to offer and to help with the program from a technical capability standpoint. He's not an acquisition SME from the perspective of rulemaking. Very few of us are. And I do believe the rulemaking part does hurt his head. It's not an
Mine
easy
too.
process. So and we've been very well embraced in CIO and been made part of the CIO family. So it's been wonderful.
So that the summer, May the 23 date, when you say it comes into contracts, is that the kind of thing where this might start appearing in all contracts, or would it get phased in at that point? What can we expect to see on that day and the days right after that?
Right. So we're going to go, if anybody was familiar with the way 1.0 was written up in the first interim rule, we're implementing on a phased rollout again. This time it'll be shorter though. It'll only be 3 years because we're still trying to get it in all contracts by 2026. We think that the ecosystem for the assessors and the C3 PAOs will be in a spot within 3 years that they can handle the throughput. So what will happen is when we first roll out, the first year you'll see CMMC level 2 in some contracts. I think the main thing is it will be the enforcement of everybody will need to do a self-assessment, and they will need to do that annual affirmation starting day 1. And then from there, we will have contracts that will require that third-party assessment, and we'll build up from there. And in 2026, the hope is it will be in all contracts that have FCI and CUI, right? So COTS products, COTS contracts are excluded. They're not required to do CMMC at this point in time.
Yep.
Not that they're not subject to being attacked, but we felt like that they didn't need to do the CMMC requirement.
I'm seeing some really excellent audience questions come in that I want to make sure we get time for. So I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit, and we were talking. I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to talk about the timeline. You just laid some of that out. I want to talk about use of managed service providers. So one of the challenges that's emerged is how do we understand and certify service providers? So a lot of contractors in the DIB, especially the smaller companies, use managed service providers for IT support, for security support. And in many cases, they can end up being the people who are doing the great majority of the CMMC practices, right? Many of these companies have really outsourced all the heavy lifting around their IT to a managed service provider. So the contractors, can save a lot of time and money on their assessment if their assessor can inherit evidence from those service providers, and it avoids some duplication of effort, right? We don't want to assess the same service provider over and over and over. And so this, to me, seems like a really critical leverage point that can accelerate assessments, reduce assessment costs for the DIB. Does it make sense in your mind to prioritize voluntary service provider assessment? And is that something that you guys are talking about, within your shop?
So what we are looking for are ways to ease the burden on the DIB, right? And so cybersecurity as a service is a logical place that we're moving to, right? So we're looking at being able to explore pilots for those kinds of things moving forward. And then as we have seen, right, it's like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come, right? So what we've seen is a lot of different companies with the managed service provider perspective and cybersecurity as a service have started building up. So, okay, what does that mean? Well, we're going to have to make sure that we have a model and requirements that fit that paradigm to ensure that those providers are secure as well as the companies using them. So one of the things that we're doing here in the next couple of weeks is we're having a meeting with Mr. McEwen where we're proposing what kind of requirements we would ask managed service providers, cybersecurity as a service, people who use cloud capabilities to employ and be able to be validated so companies could be secure in using them, that they meet the requirements, right? So that's one thing that we are working on, and hopefully it will be able to be included in our rulemaking so that companies will know right away that they are what they're required to do and what needs to happen.
Because one of the challenges with looking at just the service provider could go out and get a CMMC certification, once those are commercially available. But those assessments, as they stand today, they focus on how that service provider protects their systems and data, but it doesn't directly assess the functional aspects of the service they provide to others, right? So the level 2 assessment guide talks about inheritance from external service providers, but it's not clear that if a service provider went out and got a CMMC assessment report, it wouldn't contain the evidence that the assessor needs. So for example, the report might show that the MSP is doing a great job of patching their system, so they pass that requirement, but it doesn't assess whether they're doing an effective job of patching their client systems, right? That's a functional service they're providing. So in how, thinking about how a service provider could get those services vetted and included in a third-party report that their clients, assessors, could inherit from, is that something that is part of that discussion you're just talking about?
Right. So yes, and one of the things that's a key component of those is that customer responsibility matrix, right? And making sure that the body of, so when that assessor comes on site, he understands everything that's happening. And like I said, we're getting ready to brief Mr. McEwen here in the next couple of weeks on our proposal for what a managed service if I could only speak, managed service provider would have to meet, what requirements, how would that work, what would that look like? And so once we get his approval, we can start socializing that with everybody and letting them know, and hopefully including it in the rule. Now, the hard part is, as we go through this and as we document this rule for the 32 CFR, you're documenting the program. So you're walking through every piece part and putting down exactly step by step how everything works. Well, as we go through this and we're trying to make these decisions, I still have to meet the requirement that we've been asked to meet. I have to get that rule completed and documented by end of July, right? So we're working hard, but then we uncover something else that's like, oh, wait, we've got to stop and we've got to think about this. We've got to make decisions on this. So that's why it's going to be wildly important for everybody to pay attention to the rule when it comes out and comment on that during that public comment period, because there may not be a lot of time between when I get to make that meeting with Mr. McEwen and have him, slap the table on what he thinks we agreed to, and putting that rule text together, right? I may not have a whole lot of time to get out and socialize that before I have to have it written in the rule.
So we may have to circle back in on the rule, the commenting period with some of these items. Yeah.
Yes.
That's good. I've got an audience question I want to work in. This is about scoping guidance that's out there for CMMC. And this audience member, I won't identify her, but I'll just say she's a big time CISO. And she mentions in here that she's confused. It's confusing. This document is confusing. And I'll say, if she's confused, we're all confused. So she says, can you discuss the CMMC scoping guidance document? Is that being revised at all? There seems to be a lot of concepts in it that have never been seen or discussed before in regards to CMMC scope, and is very confusing from a boundary perspective.
So I think, yes, we are. Right. So we've had several people reach out to us. What we're asking is anybody that's in industry that has comments on that, pass them through the AB to us. We're trying to make sure that we collect them all in one spot. And so we've had some of the C3PAOs that have opined on this and what have you. So that is something we are definitely looking at. And if you have comments and concerns, please send them to us so we can make sure we hone that document to where it's useful, because that's the intent of it. And when we talk about boundaries, right, and I do understand that it can be confusing because each company is different. So there are things there that we won't be able to be specific and kind of give you a detailed explanation, because everybody defines their boundaries different. So I think at the end of the day, since I'm not the technical genius that some of the people that support me are, the way they explained it to me is when you look at where that data touches in your network, that's where you have to draw that boundary line, right? So if you have an enclave that data would never touch, that's not in your boundary. Now, when you start talking about the IT and OT, that was something that, we've heard a lot of consternation about that, and contractor managed applications are another area of concern that we're trying to hone and make sure that people are understand what needs to happen. But there's also a lot that, especially with this older equipment, that you can't update or patch. You almost have to air gap or isolate it. There are different things that you can do to protect it, but that is going to all be predicated on where you draw your boundary.
And I've got another question about some of a related topic from another audience member, also a big time CISO, who's expressing that he's not exactly sure how to apply this, right? And he's talking about people who have unusual workloads, things that are laboratory instruments, manufacturing equipment, beside some IT equipment, and that has to store and process some CUI. And he's asking, is it your expectation that we consider all these devices as specialized assets in the context of CMMC? Like, should they all be kind of lumped in there? Is that?
And you know what? I'm not sure that I'm equipped to answer that question based on the definition of specialized assets at this point in time. What I would say is that you have to understand how those pieces of equipment interact, right? And so if they have a function that calls out that gets patched outside, then when you have CUI that sits on that machine that is vulnerable, then you've got to figure out how to protect it. And so, that's one of the things where we talk about isolation or air gapping and things of that nature. So I hate to email me that, and I'll make sure that the IT technical experts can give you a good definition for that.
Cool. And it seems like the specialized asset category is kind of the way you described. It's for things where you need to protect it, but not in the normal way, because the normal way wouldn't make any sense. So you come up with some other ways, right? And it doesn't go through the normal assessment process, but that doesn't relieve you of the obligation to protect it. I think that's.
At the end of the day, 95% of this is about protecting our and your data, right? So the thing is you've got something that's really cool that everybody else wants. How are you going to keep it away from them? Because we don't want another airplane that looks like the JSF flying around in China, right? And we spend billions and billions of hours and dollars and blood, sweat, and tears to develop that, to only have somebody come in and exfil all that data and build their own in 2.3. They didn't pay for the development. They didn't pay for the engineering hours to figure out how to make this thing work. They didn't spend all the hours trying to figure out why it wouldn't take off from a carrier, right? So why would we want to, why would we want to lay ourselves open to having somebody else come in and steal our capability? Because now when I send my son up in that airplane, he has somebody with a commensurate capability that is parallel, right? So he's lost his advantage. And I, as a mother, don't want to put my kid in a situation where he doesn't have advantage. You know, these are people's lives we're talking about, right? When you start thinking about the end all be all of this is to protect our nation's children, people, right? To make sure that they come home to us and that they get to be members of our family for all of their lives, and not having to give up their lives to protect our freedom.
Well said. And we just had Memorial Day 2 days ago, so less people that we have to think about on that day.
Exactly.
If we can avoid those casualties. This audience question is about some comments that Mr. McCune has made about creating a cloud environment to help support the small and medium-sized businesses, and he's mentioned it publicly a few times. This person says, as an MSP supporting small businesses with CMMC compliance, this is of great interest, but also causing some wait and see scenarios with businesses that are trying to figure out how to afford CMMC and not overinvest by creating their own solution if they don't have to. So I guess, if the government's going to come out with something, maybe I'll just wait for that, trough to appear.
So I think there are going to be a couple of steps that we're going to go through, right? So initially we are going to have, I've asked the model team to go look at how we would apply the FedRAMP requirements, the CMMC requirements. What would it look like for an MSP? What would they need to bring to the table for a company to securely use them and be able to say, I'm cool, I've got ABC company as my managed service provider. And we go, oh, yes, we've looked at them and they've passed everything with flying colors and they have all the requirements met for what they need to do for you. And then you show me what you need to do for your side of the house touching them. And that would be how we would look at that. We're also just hopefully getting some funding to run some pilots of what it would look like if we set up something that would be a cybersecurity as a service for small and medium businesses. But you guys all know where we've been with our budget cycle. None of that money has loaded into any of my accounts yet. So I haven't been able to execute that. But so in the interim, for people that are looking at that, we're going to come out with requirements for what an MSP would need to meet. And I'm hoping really that my pilots become OBE, because everybody has already kind of taken that first step forward and kind of are meeting the need because they see the demand.
So I've got one more audience question. This one relates back to our topic about service providers and how we vet the ecosystem. This person says a big aspect of CMMC 2.0 was a renewed emphasis on integrity of the assessment ecosystem. Recently, more and more stories about dishonest vendors and service providers in the implementation ecosystem are popping up. So people that are out there claiming that they've met all these requirements and they can take their customers there, but they really don't have the stuff. The question is, does the department have a plan for responding to companies who were misled when the assessment begins and they're unable to pass? So in the scenario where they buy something thinking it's going to get them there, they get in front of an assessor and the whole thing falls apart. What is the department doing maybe to help vet that earlier in the cycle so those kind of accidents don't happen?
So, well, I think by virtue of the fact that we're going to put requirements for those MSPs that need to be met and come up with that, I think we're working with the CMMC AB to have a way to be able to highlight those companies who have passed that requirement, right? So it would be like a company coming up with a CMMC hybrid certification, or I don't exactly know what we're going to call it or how it's going to work, but we would hopefully have a mechanism that they could be highlighted on the AB, right, where they could be listed, because, as with FedRAMP is precluded from listing anybody who isn't engaged with a direct contract with the federal government. So that leaves all these other people out there that don't have the virtue of a direct contract, that want to help and be part and parcel with it and want to go get the certification, but they don't have a means to be exposed that they have it. So we're working with the AB to see if they can do something to help some of these companies out. Now, if you've made a bad investment and have gotten bad advice, there's not much that we can do. We can't make you whole. We can't pay you or cover your costs for that. That's kind of one of those business decisions that you have to make. I would say that you need to be able to look at the assessment guides and the documentation we put out first, try to understand what it is you need to do and be able to ask educated questions, and, look for people who are tried and true. I know that there are people that are out there as consultants. Some have gone through training, some don't need to go through training because they're smart enough as it is, and they can consult with you based on just their personal understanding and capabilities. So you've got to figure that out. The federal government and DoD cannot bias you towards one company or another. It's a free and open market, so you are free to make your choices.
But the vetting process you described would help a lot, right? Because it sets a bar that the service providers have to pass. And so it helps weed that out before they're engaged with their clients. And I think the FedRAMP comment, very relevant to us at NeoSystems. We sell our services not to the federal government, but to the defense contractors or government contractors in general. And so, we are in that place you described, right, where we take this very seriously, but there's not a path through FedRAMP. And there's also not a path for anything that's not a cloud service, right? So any services that are more of a human in the loop, managed service, could be IT support, fixing your PCs, that kind of thing.
Right.
They may be remote, but they're not cloud-based in the sense of the NIST definition. So FedRAMP doesn't work for those either. So having something that you're describing that would support that community, I think would be extremely valuable. So I'm really glad to hear that it's in the works. I think we are near the end of our time. I'll just ask kind of a closing question. So there's obviously a lot going on the government side with the rulemaking. You described the short deadlines, all the work you've got to do. So that's got a lot of steps to go. I want to get your top advice for those of us that are outside of government. In particular, I think there's a group of people who believe that this rulemaking period that the government's undergoing should be kind of a nap time for the private sector. And I don't think that's a good way to think about it, but I've heard some of that wait and see. Let's wait and see the rule. What's your advice for people outside of government while the rulemaking is going on?
I would not rest on your laurels. Are you guys familiar with the Shields Up? Daggone, I can't think of my words today. I think I'm getting too old for all this, but we've had these notifications that have been coming out resoundingly every day from CISA, right? There are attacks happening constantly. And CMMC is just the first step in protecting yourself. And I think, the one whole thought for CMMC is for contractors to start being aware of the risk and understanding what needs to happen to be able to protect yourself, right? I mean, CMMC is not just for protection of DoD data, it's protection of your data and your companies. I mean, since I've been doing this, I've heard multiple people say that their cage codes have been stolen by our adversaries and their payments, right? Your government payment that's supposed to come to you for work you've performed has been rerouted to somebody else's bank account, right? And guess what? I don't have another 40, 50, $100 million sitting in an account in the federal government to pay you again. Like, oh, sorry, somebody stole it here. Let me give it to you again. Doesn't happen. We don't have it. We have this much money. And when it's gone, we don't get any more. And we're still waiting for things to be loaded from last year, right? So to that end, protect yourself, understand, get smart, and know what attack vectors are out there and take positive steps to protect yourself. If you can't do all of the CMMC requirements, at least figure out what people are after from you and protect yourself in that way and start making positive steps towards that end today. And CMMC was really put together to try to help educate companies of what you can do, what can be done, what things to look at to protect yourself. The whole hope is one day we won't need CMMC anymore, that companies will be out in front of us going, dude, I already figured this out. I know they're coming. I can see this factor. I've protected myself against it. And you don't even have to I did it before you even put it in your requirement. That's my hope. I hope when I'm an old lady, hopefully sitting on the beach somewhere, right, retired, I can pick up the newspaper and see CMMC is no longer needed because companies are so out in front of the federal government protecting themselves and their data. It's no longer necessary. It's deemed a waste of time.
I hope you can read that headline. I'll be on a mountain, not a beach, but same idea.
Well, hopefully it'll be before we're like 80 or 90 when I have to ask, hopefully one day my grandchildren, even though that's not looking like much of a perspective for me, but you know, come read this for Granny because she can't find her glasses.
I thank you for your time today. Thanks to the audience for sending in some great questions. I only got to about half of them. They were more plentiful and more thoughtful than our 30-minute timeline would allow, but we got a few good ones in. And thanks, Stacy, for joining us. Thanks to Wade for drawing a picture for us. We'll send that out to everyone after. Please join us for future meetings. We've got a next session is going to be 2 weeks from today on Wednesday, June 15th at 1 o'clock Eastern. If you don't have the invitation in your inbox, go to our website, neosystemscorp.com for those details. Stacy, were you going to say something else, or?
No, I was like, I'm trying to peek at what Wade's doing up there because it tickles me. I love it.
If you stick around, we'll do a little debrief with it.
Oh, there you go.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.